Hello, I'm Paul Johnson, an assistant professor here at Pitt in the Department of Communication. My scholarship focuses mostly on questions of democracy and the health of the polity, and I'm specifically interested in the question of what makes a people. Everywhere in our public discourse, there's this clear consensus that there is such a thing as an American people, and we find it used not only ironically. I don't know about your 4th of July, but mine featured an awful lot of irony-soaked Americas, but also very sincerely in public discourse. One thing particularly that animates my work is an interest in the partisan circulation of this concept, tracking and tracing the usage of the word. Starting in the 1960s, American conservatives and their organ, the Republican Party, started to perform this populism. Since then, we've seen it in various strains: Richard Nixon's silent majority, the idyllic Americans of Ronald Reagan's Morning in America campaign, up through today's more contemporary appearances, like that of the rhetoric of the Tea Party. Conversely, there's a tendency for left political actors and progressives to conceive of their populism as implicit rather than explicit. The sort of big tent on the left that claims to admit NPR listeners, Bill Ayers, fighters for reproductive and racial justice, locates their claim to populism in the content of the party's ethos of inclusion, rather than through repeated, explicit usage of the phrase which suggests that they're in the business of representing the people. My research, I think, is a pretty natural fit with the department here at Pitt. One keen interest is the deliberative environment of the mass public, media, commentary, political speeches, blogs, political activism. And this is a really exciting, albeit troubling time, to be studying the form of public argument in the context of democratic theory. Since 2008, we've seen the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, protests demanding racial justice, 2 intense presidential election cycles. How America is making sense of itself at the moment is a really pressing question. Of course, one always has to be careful about fretting about political polarization, but there's something to the notion that right now we're in more of a peak, right, a peak state than a norm in terms of the partisan polarization of our national politics. The rhetorical critic can look for signs and causes of this polarization in our national environment. And that's what a lot of my research does, looking for moments where empty phrases like people, liberty, freedom substitute for content-rich policy disputation. This is why I remain interested and invested in public address. Presidents and other elected representatives are often places to read evidence of social change in process. For example, there was a tendency to say that Occupy Wall Street didn't achieve anything, that it had no clear goals. Certainly this might be the case if you wanted to use a very narrow concept of cause and effect in ascertaining what they did. But in terms of making wealth inequality a pressing public issue, of generating controversy, discussion, and attention to that matter, you have to say it's a success. Whether or not you can see it when a comment like the 47% puts Mitt Romney on the run, or when Bernie Sanders can move pretty far to the left in the Democratic primary in this year's election cycle. With all this in mind, I'm certainly excited to teach some graduate level courses at the intersection of my interests and those of the department. I would hope to offer a graduate seminar that performed a kind of rhetorical genealogy of the political, migrating from the classical conceptions of sovereignty into the more modern democratic terra firma of America by reading folks from rhetoric and political theory who raise important questions, specifically about the relationship between the imagined wholeness of the nation and its actually existing status as a fractured identity riven with difference. There are all sorts of interesting ways to raise questions about these fantasies of a totally unified polity that are attractive. You can approach them from the perspective of gender, right? Asking why it is that there's this persistent demand for a total, completely controlled, closed political system. You can or approach them from the perspective of radical democratic theory, which worries about how the formal repetition of the idea of democracy, right, we pay a lot of lip service to it, doesn't actually prove that one is actually inhabiting or building democracy, and so on and so forth. I'm also very excited to teach a class in rhetorical theory, one that would combine contemporary key works from some of my favorite thinkers in the field, folks like Jeremy Ingalls, Vanessa Beasley, Jeff Bennett, Chris Lundberg, Eric Watts, our own Joanna Artilius, just to name a few, and pair it with some of the social theory that informs their work. So perhaps read not just Ingalls, but do it alongside Chantal Mouffe. Perhaps look at some of Joanna's work on expertism alongside Richard Hofstadter. In that vein, I'm really excited about what we've got here at Pitt. We have an amazing collection of faculty with diverse interests that make it a really wonderful place to work and to think. I'm very enthused to be a part of it, and I hope you'll learn more about the department.